The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows on the sidewalk as I approached the house. It was a Victorian-era home, tall and imposing, with a sense of faded grandeur. The windows were dark, like empty eyes staring out at me. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around myself. I've been a babysitter for years, but there was something about this house that unsettled me. The air itself felt heavy, burdened with unseen secrets. I rang the doorbell and waited, the silence broken only by the distant sound of a dog barking. A moment later, the door creaked open, revealing a woman with tired eyes and a nervous smile. "He's already asleep," Mrs. Davis whispered, her voice barely audible over the creaking of the old house. She led me up the grand staircase, the shadows dancing on the walls as they ascended. "Just check on him every hour or so," she instructed, her eyes filled with a mix of concern and worry. I nodded, her unease growing with every step she took. The air seemed to grow colder, and the silence was almost deafening. The boys' room was at the end of the hallway, a long, dark stretch that seemed to go on forever. It was bathed in the faint glow of a nightlight, casting eerie shadows on the walls. He lay still beneath the covers, his chest rising and falling rhythmically, a picture of peaceful slumber. I pulled up a chair beside the bed, my gaze lingering on the boy's pale face, wondering what dreams might be playing behind his closed eyelids. Minutes stretched into an hour, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, each tick echoing like a heartbeat. Then I heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible, coming from the corner of the room. It was as if the darkness itself was speaking to me. I turned my head, my heart pounding in my chest, the whisper growing louder, more insistent. The rocking chair, which had been still moments before, was now moving slowly back and forth, as if an unseen hand was gently pushing it. Panic surged through me. I called out, my voice trembling, "Hello? Is someone there?" Silence met my question. The rocking chair creaked back and forth, a steady, unnerving rhythm. Suddenly, the bedroom door slammed shut with a resounding bang. I jumped to my feet, my breath catching in my throat. I rushed to the door, my hands shaking as I reached for the handle. It was locked. Fear coiled in my stomach, cold and sharp. I rattled the handle, my heart pounding against my ribs. "Help!" I cried out, my voice muffled by the thick wood. "Let me out!" The whispering grew louder, circling me, taunting me. It was as if the very walls were alive, breathing out secrets and fears. It was coming from above, a persistent, haunting sound that sent chills down my spine. I looked up and saw it, a trap door in the ceiling, slightly ajar. The dim light seeping through seemed to beckon me, inviting her to uncover its mysteries. A pale, flickering light spilled from the opening, casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. Driven by a mixture of terror and desperate curiosity, I dragged a heavy dresser across the room, pushing it beneath the trap door. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing the whispers around me. As I climbed, the whispers intensified, swirling around me like a malevolent wind. They seemed to speak in a language I couldn't understand, yet felt deeply. The attic was a cavernous space, filled with shadows and the musty scent of decay. Every corner seemed to hide a secret, every shadow a lurking presence. Cobwebs brushed my face as I made my way towards the source of the light, a single flickering bulb hanging above a wooden rocking horse. The sight of the rocking horse, eerily still, sent a shiver down my spine. And there, sitting astride the rocking horse, was a young boy. His presence was almost ethereal, blending into the dim light of the room. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes held a wisdom far beyond his years. It was as if he had seen things no child should ever witness. He smiled, a chillingly empty expression that sent shivers down my spine. The smile was devoid of any warmth, a stark contrast to the innocence one would expect from a child. "We've been waiting for you," he whispered, his voice a low thrum that seemed to vibrate in my bones. "He wants to play," he added, the words dripping with a sinister promise. He gestured towards the shadows behind him, his finger pointing to a darkness that seemed to pulse with malevolence. My breath hitched in my throat. Fear gripped my heart as I tried to comprehend the reality of the situation. I could make out the faint outline of a figure, tall and skeletal, its eyes burning with an unnatural light. The figure seemed to be watching me, waiting, and in that moment I understood. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place, revealing a horrifying truth. The whispers, the strange occurrences, the locked door, it had all been a game. A twisted, terrifying game designed to ensnare me. A terrifying game orchestrated by the whispering boy and the entity that lurked in the shadows behind him. Together, they had woven a web of fear and dread, and now I was caught in it. Lily's parents had just moved into this old farmhouse, a place that seemed to hold secrets within its walls. They needed a babysitter for the night, and I was more than happy to help. Everything seemed normal, except for one thing that caught my attention almost immediately. Her doll. It had a porcelain face, delicate and fragile, with glassy blue eyes that never blinked, staring into nothingness. It was always sitting in the same spot on the rocking chair next to her bed, as if it were watching over her. Before Lily went to sleep, she grabbed my hand tightly and whispered to me, her voice trembling, "Please don't let her get out of the chair." I laughed, trying to calm her worries. "You mean your doll?" I asked, thinking it was just a child's imagination. She just nodded, but her eyes, they were filled with something I didn't understand. Something like fear, a fear that seemed too real for a child her age. I tucked her into bed, assuring her that everything would be fine. But as I turned off the light, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Sitting in the living room, I started to hear strange noises coming from upstairs. My heart raced as I tried to convince myself it was just the old house settling. But then I saw it. The doll's eyes seemed to gleam in the dark, and the rocking chair moved slightly. My breath caught in my throat. Gathering my courage, I grabbed a flashlight and headed for the stairs, each step echoing in the silent house. What was I about to discover? It was late, the kind of late where the world seems to be holding its breath, and the house was deathly quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you wonder if you're really alone. Then I heard it. Creak, creak, creak. My heart stopped. A shiver ran down my spine. I crept up the stairs, trying to be logical. Maybe Lily got up. Maybe she was thirsty or having a bad dream. Maybe she moved the doll. It was just a doll after all. Nothing to be afraid of, right? But when I checked her room, she was sound asleep. And the doll that was always sitting on the rocking chair, was gone. The chair was empty, rocking gently back and forth as if someone had just left it. It was on the floor, facing the door. Its glassy eyes seemed to stare right at me, sending chills down my spine. I bent down and picked it up. Its glassy eyes stared up at me, unblinking as if it had a life of its own. The air around me grew colder, and a shiver ran down my spine. Then I heard it. A giggle right behind me. It was a little girl's giggle, but it felt wrong, twisted. I was shaking now, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. I put the doll back on the chair as fast as I could, my hands trembling. The moment I let go, Lily screamed, "You let her out!" Her voice echoed in the room, filled with terror and urgency. The bedroom door slammed shut with a deafening bang. A heavy breath filled the room, but it wasn't mine. It was as if someone or something was standing right beside me. Then silence, a deep, suffocating silence, the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're not alone, even when you can't see anyone. I held my breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. I didn't wait. I grabbed my phone, my jacket, and I ran. I didn't care if Lily's parents thought I was crazy. I had to get out. As I reached for the doorknob, I felt it, a cold breath right on my neck. And then the lights flickered, the floorboards creaked, and somewhere deep within the house, that giggle echoed once more. I refused to go back. But weeks later, Lily's family moved out. Her mother called me, her voice trembling. She said they started hearing whispers, tiny footsteps at night, and that sometimes they would wake up and find the doll sitting in front of their bedroom door. There are things that should never be touched. There are things that should never be let out, and that doll, whatever it was, is still out there, waiting, watching. It was 1987. I was a high school senior, babysitting for the Johnsons, a nice couple with 2 kids, a boy and a girl. They were headed to a wedding, and I was left in charge for the night. The house was old, with creaky wooden floors and dim, yellow lighting. It had that strange stillness, like it had been waiting for something to happen. The kids, Tommy and Emily, were already asleep upstairs. Their parents left me emergency numbers, cash for pizza, the usual. "We'll be back around midnight," they said. "Easy money." Or so I thought. Around 9 p.m., I was curled up on the couch watching TV when the phone rang. I picked it up. Silence. Then, in a raspy, almost inhuman whisper, a voice said, "Check the children." A cold chill crawled down my spine. I glanced at the baby monitor. Silent, no movement. "Who is this?" I asked. Click. They hung up. I laughed it off. Probably just some weirdo prank caller. This was the 80s. No caller ID, no way to trace it. I brushed it off, but then the phone rang again. I let it ring 5, 6, 7 times. Finally, I picked up. The same voice, even closer. "Check the children." I hung up. Something didn't feel right. I ran upstairs, threw open their bedroom doors. Tommy, fast asleep. Emily, on the floor playing with her dolls. They were fine. I took a deep breath. Maybe it really was just a prank. But then, the phone rang again. I answered, my hands shaking. And this time, the voice laughed. "I see you." My stomach dropped. I looked around the dark house. Every shadow suddenly seemed deeper. Every corner held something unseen. My heart pounded in my chest. I called the police. The dispatcher's voice was calm. "Next time he calls, keep him on the line. We'll trace it." So, I waited. Minutes felt like hours. Then, ring. I picked up. My voice barely a whisper. "Who is this?" Silence. Then, slowly, deliberately, "I used to live in that house." I couldn't breathe. My fingers felt frozen around the receiver. Then, a knock at the door. I nearly screamed, but it was the cops. I let them in, my hands trembling, and then the final call came. One officer picked up the phone. "Hello?" he said. Silence. The officer's face went pale. He turned to me, his voice tight. "Where did this call come from?" I felt sick. "What do you mean?" he whispered. "This number, it's coming from inside the house." They searched the house, every room, every closet, nothing. But then, in the basement, they found an old rotary phone. The cord was ripped out of the wall, the plastic covered in dust. It hadn't been used in decades, and yet it was the number that had been calling me. The police had no answers, no forced entry, no sign of anyone inside. But the next morning, the Johnsons told me something I will never forget. Their house? It used to belong to an old man. He lived there alone for years after his wife passed away, and before he died, he spent his last years calling her old number over and over, even though she was gone, even though no one was ever there to answer. I never babysat again after that night, but sometimes, in the middle of the night, when I'm alone, my phone still rings, and when I pick up, silence, static, heavy breathing, a final whisper, "I see you." If you made it to the end, Let me know, what would you do if you got that call? Like, share, and don't forget to check your phone lines before it's too late.